Hello, I'm Em, and welcome to another of my episodes about traps. Cool and unusual for your tabletop campaigns. They are going to be original or interesting classics, and you can use them freely. And if you have any doubts whether they suit your table, don't forget to watch my tutorial on how to implement traps in fun, interactive manners that are fun and enjoyable for the players and do not just give them grief, but rather give them opportunities to fight fair and square and feel intelligent and triumphant above all else. And now let's get to the traps themselves. At number 1, we have a simple one, just to give some excitement. We have a slime pit. You can have a dramatic fight over a pit on a log or a tiny bridge or whatever your dexterity requiring precarious obstacle of choice is, but usually pits are not that scary because they're either fall and take damage or fall and cutscene like thing transports you to the bottom and so on. And even if it's a deep enough hole that it's likely to kill you, that's kind of boring. So what we have here is a pit full of jellies and oozes and slimes and whatever and puddings, whatever you want. And there's so many in the pit that they are essentially filling it out like a liquid. And whoever falls in will get attacked by at least 12 of them at the same time, first opportunity they get. So it's not an instant loss, but whoever falls down and doesn't get rescued within one round will feel it. So it'll be interesting to fall in, but it'll be of interest to not fall in, and it'll be also very interesting for players to see what happens to their opponent when they push them in. And it's also memorable. You know how some traps are nice, some obstacles are nice in your role-playing because they're uniquely memorable when they happen. They served a purpose that wasn't directly related to the lethality of the environment necessarily towards your adventurer character, but they were something to behold and make a note of mentally for just fun as you passed along. So this is the kind of thing that gives all these attributes and opportunities to the encounter. Next, at number 2, we have moving floor. And moving floor in this case is similarly something interesting that will not be so lethal and so deadly as some of my other traps, but it'll give different scenery to fight in. So imagine a largish room with a floor that's made so that it, once it's triggered, moves in a diagonal direction at some decent speed. And players will maybe be fighting either some flying or hovering or levitating enemies, or enemies that are swinging from branches, chains, whatever, on the ceiling, so that the enemies don't have to care about it, but your players need to constantly sort of run to stay in place and such. So this will create some additional thinking and interesting situations, and whenever somebody fails to take their footing into consideration, you can have a roll for whether they fall down on the floor or not, and so on. If you want it to be more dangerous, you can even have the room not be enclosed and one side where the floor is inevitably running towards be a precarious edge, so as to dump them into something. Previous pit, maybe? But it doesn't matter, it's just a question of how to best decorate your dungeon at this point. That's what the moving floor in this case is, but it can be used in many ways, which we'll probably discuss one day in these traps. Now at number 3 we have glass dust. You see, you can have quite interesting custom status effects when you have interesting custom traps. So imagine in this section of a dungeon you have these air chutes that are almost like air ducts for ventilation, but what they're used for actually is to force under high pressure, for example high air pressure, to force very fine glass dust suddenly into the whole corridor. And this will give you opportunity to homebrew your custom status effect for both eyes and lungs of your players' characters. And you can give more interactivity to this. For example, what if they have water to jump into? So they have a choice when they see a cloud of something glittery and dangerous looking approach. They have the opportunity to jump before their eyes get stung or their lungs get full of glass. So they can be underwater and be relatively safe from glass. But the water is full of something equivalent to ravenous piranhas of your choice. And the water is also poisonous to humanoids mostly, but specifically not to those fishes or whatever you have. Essentially, it's poisonous to most other things that are not the thing that was placed there by design of the dungeon keeper in question. So you have interactive opportunity for them to choose what they face and how they face it, and if they are not brave enough to make a choice, then they'll unfortunately suffer from both. Unfortunate, but at least you have interesting and complex traps and challenges to face your players with. Now next at number 4 we have electric chains. Imagine one of those from old movies, castles at the cliff top that are struck constantly by thunder, and some sort of doctor is working to animate their zombie monster with thunderbolts or whatever. So if somebody has such a dungeon already available where there's constantly thunder, they may as well use it and make a room full of hanging chains that are all connected to the lightning attractor at the roof. So as your characters are fighting the undead monster that enjoys lightning, they get occasionally the opportunity to either dodge and lie down on the floor, or be still touching the chains that are hanging all around, touching everybody, and get electrocuted by lightning. And the monster gets electrocuted, but the monster is enjoying it and getting some bonuses from it. So this is again interactive in so that your player's characters can jump down to avoid, but they'll be prone. And all kinds of things can develop from this. Now, if you want to make more out of it, you can have the chains be animated so that they constrict and hold people, and then when lightning strikes, well, you get the picture. And other forms can exist. Instead of chains, you can have a shallow puddle pool at the roof that is obviously connected to the lightning attractor, and then if players aren't smart enough to get out of the pool, which isn't necessarily obvious unless you look at the connection and everything and guess the situation you're in before the lightning actually strikes there, you will be standing in the shallow pool and get electrocuted when the lightning strikes. Those and more are all your options to spice things up. And finally, at number 5, we have diseased arrows. You want to show to your adventurers that some things are not so readily obvious, that some things can linger, that some things can be dangerous way after you have beaten the trap and broken the obstacle and even left the dungeon. You can have diseased arrows or whatever the opponents or traps are using, because it's not visible and it's hard to detect if it's not some sort of magical disease, and only specific detections will detect a mundane disease on a pointy spike of some sorts, and yet you can have the opponents use this as standard thing to grease up the tips of their arrows and shoot your players with, well, their characters, and then when they think they have finished the challenge, maybe a few minutes later, maybe an hour later into the dungeon, when they should be doing something else, they get weakened by status effects as they onset. Or maybe they leave the dungeon and the next day or day after that, suddenly, lo and behold, trouble strikes when they have been infected at the time and they didn't even know. So this, mixed with other traps, will keep your players on their toes to not underestimate the dungeons. They are not a level in a video game. They will maybe leave their revenge even days after you have left them. Get you when you have beaten them, and whenever you drop your guard, the trap drops you. So, adventurers, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next and perhaps even every week. In the meantime, if you have some questions for me, I would love to hear them in the comments or just to talk to you all because talking together is lovely. I'm Em, and welcome to the DM table.